Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to some of you. Welcome to the International Energy, Environmental, and Society Dialogue, or IEESD, hosted by the International Institute for Sustainable Development, IISD, and Global Subsidies Initiative, GSI. My name is Eka Melissa, and I'm a climate and development specialist and also a senior advisor at the Partnership for Governance Reform, a non-governmental organization in Indonesia that specializes on issues related to governance. This is the first round of IEESD that will focusing on feasibility on green recovery in Indonesia, the role of fossil fuel subsidy reform, and in which we will hear the country's policy leaders' experience and views on green recovery, and the international practitioners and expert views on how to optimize the green recovery policy strategy. Today, we are very lucky to have a list of top-notch leaders with us to give us the keynotes and opening speech for our discussions this afternoon. But before we start the event, I just want to have some housekeeping. So first of all, please ensure that your display name represents your name, as well as your institution. For example, if your name is Irsyad, then you put it Irsyad, IISD. Mohon dipastikan display name Anda terdiri dari nama Anda dan organisasi yang Anda wakili. Contohnya, apabila nama Anda Irsyan, put Irsyan dan IEESD. For panelists, please make sure that you are on mute version, except that requested to be unmute by the moderator or MC. Bagi para panelis, pastikan audio Anda tetap dalam posisi mute, kecuali jika diminta untuk unmute oleh moderator atau MC. The webinar is equipped with interpretation feature. So if you wish, please speak in English language and interpreters will interpret to Indonesian language and vice versa. For English speaking participant, if you wish to listen to English interpretations, click interpretations on your Zoom panel, choose English. The Zoom panel can only be seen if you are using a Zoom application. You do not need to change channel when speaking. Other participant and interpreter are still able to hear your voice. Bapak dan Ibu, webinar ini dilengkapi fitur interpretation. Bila berkenan, silahkan berdiskusi dalam bahasa Indonesia dan juru bahasa akan menerjemahkannya ke dalam bahasa Inggris serta sebaliknya. Untuk para peserta pengguna bahasa Indonesia, jika Anda ingin mendengar terjemahan dalam bahasa Indonesia, klik interpretation pada panel Zoom Anda yang hanya akan tersedia pada Zoom aplikasi. Pilih Indonesian. Tidak perlu pindah channel saat Anda berbicara, para peserta pertemuan lainnya dan juru bahasa tetap bisa mendengar Anda. If you would like to ask questions or give comments during or after presentations and during the Q&A session, please type them in the Q&A box by using the following format: name / institution / to the name of the panelist / questions. Jika Anda ingin bertanya atau memberikan komentar saat atau setelah paparan dan selama sesi tanya jawab, mohon tuliskan pertanyaan atau komentar Anda di kotak Q&A dengan menggunakan format berikut: nama, garis miring institusi, garis miring kepada, nama panelis, garis miring pertanyaan. If you do experience any technical problems, please notify the following co-hosts. Technical support, you can find them in the participant list. In the chat box, you can choose their names and send a private message to the co-host. Jika Bapak dan Ibu mengalami kendala teknis selama webinar ini, mohon hubungi co-host berikut, technical support, di mana Anda dapat mengirimkan pesan pribadi di chat box dengan cara memilih nama co-host di atas. This webinar is also live stream at TNP2K YouTube channel. Webinar ini juga disiarkan secara langsung di kanal YouTube TNP2K. Anda dapat Google TNP2K Komunikasi. You can Google TNP2K Komunikasi to find the YouTube. Since we already have our speakers with us, we are going to take a picture first, a group pictures. So for all the panelists, would you please open your video now? I still find, okay. So all the panelists, I will do the countdown and then we will take the video on 1. So 3, 2, 1. Okay, one more time to make sure that everybody has a good pictures. 3, 2, 1. Okay.
Bu Eka, sekali lagi Bu Eka,
Yeah.
masih ada yang baru buka video, so to give
I
everyone
see. Okay. Sorry,
please, we will do a couple of more. Anybody that still not opening their video, please open their video, and you can do the countdown now. Thank you.
Yeah, I enable to start the video. Okay. Okay, I'll try again. Everybody, please. All the speakers and panelists, would you please open? So have everybody now? Pak John?
We have everybody, but let me check first to make sure that we get
okay,
good pictures.
Please. Yeah, I'm sorry, everyone. We have to make sure that everybody in the windows. Okay. So please give me a cue to start the countdown, Pak John.
Everyone already opening their video, please. We can do one in 3.
Okay, in 3, 2, 1.
Nice picture. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, Pak John. Thank you, everyone. Would you please also turn off your video now? Okay, now selamat siang Bapak dan Ibu. Untuk memulai acara ini kita sangat berbahagia karena pada hari ini kita dapat mendengarkan poin-poin kunci dari yang kita hormati Bapak Wakil Presiden Republik Indonesia yang sekaligus Kepala dari Tim Nasional Percepatan Pengentasan Kemiskinan atau TNP2K, yang pada kesempatan yang berbahagia ini akan diwakili oleh yang kita hormati Bapak Menteri Koordinator Bidang Perekonomian, Dr. Honoris Causa Insinyur Airlangga Hartarto, MBA, MMT. Bapak Menteri, waktu kami persilahkan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, Excellency Mr. Peter Wooders, the Senior Director of Energy IEESD, my colleague Excellency Pak Arifin Tasrif, Excellency Ambassador of Sweden to Indonesia, Excellency Ambassador of Royal Danish to Indonesia, distinguished guests, participants of first the International Energy, Environment and Society Dialogue, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank you, the chairman of the IEESD Institute, for the first IEESD, which will discuss the feasibility of the green recovery in Indonesia. with the theme of the role of fossil fuel subsidy reform. I express my appreciation for this IEESD initiative to continue to maintain the discussion such as important policy, even though during the COVID-19 pandemics. Before I begin, I would like to convey Bapak Vice President Pak Ma'ruf Amin regret not being able to attend this important event, and I just delivered the speech today in Bapak Wapres behalf. On this occasion, allow me to discuss the theme of promoting the green energy policy to ensure the equitable access to modern and clean energy for all as part of sustainable green development. In the perspective of sustainable development, the necessary support is only measured by the economic growth, but also oriented towards improving the quality of life of the community and the development of the conducive environment. Next slide. More than 1.2 million people of Indonesia has confirmed positive for COVID, but we have to thankful that more than 1 million has recovered, or 86% rate, in order to minimize the impact of this pandemic. And Indonesia secured almost 420 million doses of vaccines that is prepared for its 180 million population. Indonesia is one of among first in ASEAN to vaccinate its people, and up to date is around 1.5 healthcare workers has been vaccinated. COVID-19 pandemics have significantly reduced the global economic growth, and data from several institutions shows that most countries have contracted more in the range of -4% in 2020, and Indonesia year to date is about -2.07, and this is comparable with others ASEAN countries like China, Vietnam, and Korea. And in Q4, the governments make the intervention through the government budgets, which is among others was shown by improving the government consumption, improving domestic demand, as well as the investment and export. Some economic indicators such as purchasing manager index, the figures is above 50% and the 50s, and in the month of January is increasing to 52.2. It means that the manufacturing sectors have confidence that the recovery will be sooner than later. Then also improvement in the retail sales index, the car sales and passenger transportation were improved as well. In 2021, Indonesia is projected to grow between 4 to 5%, and the game changers are expected to boost the economic growth. The first is completion of the vaccine 19 program, which in return will encourage confidence in the people to return to its economic activities. And also the second is Indonesia is one of the countries that is during the pandemic COVID has worked on establishing a job creation law, and the job creation law has also remaking or establishing the new government regulations and presidential regulation, especially to improve ease of doing business, and the target is to increase the investment as well as to improve Indonesia balance of trade, import and export. The energy security is a condition that is important for availability of energy and also the public access to energy at affordable price. And in the long term, we also taking into consideration to mitigate and minimize the effect of environmental issues. There are 4 factors that support energy security, namely is availability, which is guaranteed by energy availability in the countries. The second is accessibility, that is seeks to build energy infrastructure for undeveloped areas so as to reduce disparities between regions. Affordability is a key that is during the pandemic COVID-19, it's becoming more and more important that access to the people who are unable or who live in the certain remote areas, and acceptability that is support the preservation of the environments. The factors that support energy security have referred to the 3 pillars of concept of sustainable developments, both in terms of economy, community welfare, and environment. Therefore, it is necessary to implement the competent energy policy so that the direction of growth can cover various factors in sustainable development. Achieving sustainable development is a challenge, but with good collaboration and awareness of its importance, it is expected that the program can be advanced in a region in order to achieve a common prosperity. Of the various sustainable development goals, the closer linkages in energy security also refer to clean and affordable energy development, ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy, and taking important steps to fight the climate change and its effect. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, at this first IEESD, let me give input that will encourage sustainable development to be in line with promotion of the energy sectors. First is to realize the energy securities that leads to availability of energy access for every citizen with a fair price, affordable price through the region. Second is to accelerate the implementation of renewable energy that leads to clean energy through development of electric vehicles, biofuels, and the use of gas fuel for transportation, electricity, as well as industry. The third is to encourage the development of energy infrastructures and technology that will lead to use of green energy, such as geothermal, hydro, solar power, biomass, so it can be in line with the goals of sustainable green development. Finally, I would like once again to thank you, the organizer, who have invited me to deliver this keynote on behalf of Vice President Bapak Ma'ruf Amin. Indonesia also currently are mitigating the COVID-19 pandemic, and also at the same time to put program to do recovery for the economic towards sustainable economic development. And in the energy sectors, there are few action that the government are taking in these pandemic years, that is implementing the mandatory B30 policy that is supporting to the livelihood of 17 million of CPOs farmers, the green refinery expansion projects that is will making available for combination of fuel and the green refineries, and also the developments toward electric vehicle development. The government has revised the government regulation number 73 with an incentive of relaxing the luxury tax incentive. So with this, I would like to congratulate the participants, and I wish that the discussion today will have a productive outcome of this valuable conference. Thank you. May Allah always bestow His mercy and guidance to all of us. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih banyak Bapak, Your Excellencies. Thank you very much for your keynote speech. I see there's like three things that probably will be good for all the presenters, the speakers of this meeting will take into accounts for the next sessions is that to be able to put a good energy policy reforms and sustainable development. We need to look at the availability of the energy access, implementations of renewable energy, and the development of energy infrastructures, and that will lead to the use to clean energy. Thank you so much again, Bapak Menteri. Now we will turn to our second keynote speaker, His Excellency Insinyur Arifin Tasrif, the Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources of the Republic of Indonesia, who will share his vision on how energy policy reform in Indonesia will ensuring equitable access to clean and modern energy. Pak Menteri, time is yours.
Thank you. Excellency Vice President of the Republic of Indonesia, whom represented by Coordinating Minister for Economic Affairs, His Excellency Dr. Erlangga Hartarto, Minister of Finance, Your Excellency Ibu Sri Mulyani, or the representatives, Minister of State-Owned Enterprise, His Excellency Mr. Erick Thohir, and the leader and the team of the IEESD who organized this kind of dialogue, distinguished ambassadors and speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang. Good afternoon. My highest appreciation to International Institute for Sustainable Development for initiating the first International Energy, Environmental and Society Dialogue this afternoon. It is an honor to take part in such a distinguished forum and looking forward for a fruitful discussion on the feasibility of green economy in Indonesia through the role of fossil fuel subsidy reform. In accordance with the Paris Agreement goal, Indonesia committed to take a part on the global effort to hold the increase of the global average temperature below 2 degrees C, above pre-industrial levels, and to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Indonesia also committed to reduce greenhouse gas or GHG emission for 29% from business as usual by self-effort and in 2030, and 41% by conditional mitigation scenario with international support. For the energy sector, we committed to reduce GHG emission around 300 to 400 million tons of CO2 by 2030, or 38% of total emission reduction. And in 2020, Indonesia's National Determined Contribution, or NDC, realization for energy sector has reached 64.4 million tons of CO2, with main contributors are from new and renewable energy, energy efficiency, and natural gas programs. Indonesia is blessed with enormous renewable energy sources with potential of more than 400 gigawatt spreading throughout the country. However, The utilization is still only around 10 gigawatt, say about 2.5%. Renewable energy plays an important role, not only in combating climate change, but also in implementing the energy transition to a more sustainable future. The government has set a renewable energy target of 23% by 2025. And as for now, the share of renewable energy has only reached 11.3% of the total energy mix. Therefore, to ensure the achievement of this target, government continues to implement several renewable energy programs. Among others are primary final energy substitution by utilizing the existing technology for B30, co-firing, RDF utilization, fossil primary energy conversion, converting diesel power plant or coal power plant into new renewables, increasing new and renewable energy capacity to meet the new demand, focus on the development of solar power plant, utilization of non-electric new renewable energy, non-biofuel, such as briquettes and drying of biogas agricultural products. Also, acceleration of battery electric vehicle program for road transportation, and the last is about the energy efficiency program. With such a policy, it is projected that by 2035, clean energy share will reach about to 27% or 48 gigawatt, which could reduce Indonesia GHG emissions for energy sector approximately more than 370 million tons of CO2 and support industry to produce green product. In order to reach target, currently the government is preparing the Electricity Supply Business Plan or Rencana Umum Penyediaan Tenaga Listrik or RUPTL, in line with a draft of presidential regulation regarding new and renewable energy tariff. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, the government of Indonesia is currently also drafting a grand strategy energy for the development of energy sector to achieve ideal targets in terms of energy security, energy mix, and emission reductions. The strategy emphasizes on the strategy to meet national energy demand, to improve the trade balance, as well as to develop energy infrastructures. Several targets that have been set in the grand strategy energy related to energy transitions are: first, additional capacity for renewable energy power plant is targeted around 38 gigawatt in 2035, with solar power plant as priority. Solar power generation will be developed around more than 5 gigawatt in 2021 until 2030, spread across Java, Sumatra, Kalimantan, Sulawesi, Maluku, Nusa Tenggara, and Papua. These programs aim to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by almost 8 million tons of CO2. The floating PV in the Cirata Reservoir with a capacity of 145 megawatt. This is the largest floating PV in ASEAN, and the project will be completed next year. In the future, this program will be further developed, considering that we have large potential of floating PV in the country, around 28 gigawatt. The rooftop PV development program with capacity of more than 2 gigawatt will be also installed on government buildings, state-owned enterprise buildings and facilities, PLN customer and social institutions, as well as industrial business and household within the next 10 years. This program is expected to reduce GHG emissions by more than 3 million tons of CO2. The government also promotes the use of biomass co-firing in power plant. Target electricity generated from a biomass co-firing program is almost 0.5 million barrel oil equivalent by 2035. The program is estimated to reduce GHG emissions by around 1.7 million tons CO2 per year. Besides co-firing program, the government also encourages the use of waste to power plants or refuse-derived fuel, RDF. RDF is produced from various types of waste, such as municipal solid waste, industrial waste, commercial waste, or agricultural forest waste. RDF has been implemented in Cilacap, Central Java, where the product is used in the cement kiln and the local waste processing site project in Klungkung, Bali. The government also supports the acceleration of the waste to energy power plant development program, where we have 12 cities have been selected to implement this program. This program expected to be completed in 2025. The government promotes the conversion of diesel to natural gas for power plant program. This program is aimed to reduce heavy fuel oil, which is imported, and then high-speed diesel consumption. Total power plant capacity that will be shifted from diesel to natural gas is about 1.7 gigawatt, with the equivalent gas volume use more than 166 BBTUD in 52 locations. The program will be completed in 2023 and estimated to reduce GHG emissions by around 1.4 tons of CO2. The government also encourages diesel power plants to be converted to renewable energy power plants. The conversion program phase 1 will be carried out on 927 units diesel power plant in 200 locations with capacity of 225 megawatt. These efforts are projected to reduce GHG emissions by 0.74 million tons of CO2. Total diesel power plants that can be converted using in situ energy will be around 5,200 units and managed by local community. By 2021, the use of biodiesel targeted to be 9.2 million kiloliters. It is estimated that biodiesel utilization will reduce GHG emissions around 42.4 million tons of CO2 in 2030. The government also has launched battery electric vehicles program in December last year. The program aimed to improve national energy security by reducing import on oil fuel. It is targeted that BEV will be around 2 million cars and 13 million motorcycles in 2030 and replace oil fuel by about 67,000 barrel oil equivalent per day. This program is expected to reduce GHG emission more than 6 million tons of CO2. And lastly, to support the energy transition program, we have implemented energy management implementation with energy saving equivalent to 7.8 gigawatt. energy efficiency standard by labeling, with energy saving equivalent more than 1 gigawatt, energy audit, investment grade audit by IGA, with energy saving equivalent to 3 megawatt, and energy efficiency award. It is hoped it will encourage business from all sectors to improve the energy use and energy management system. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, renewable energy and energy efficiency not only essential for combating climate change and significantly reduce GHG emissions. More importantly, the implementation of renewable energy and energy efficiency is one of the keys in assuring a green economic recovery in the post-pandemic era, as well as maintaining energy security and building energy resiliency for our future generation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Terima kasih, Bapak. From the keynotes that you have, it does look like that Indonesia has significantly increased its support to the renewable energy project development. And it seems like it's such a great sign for Indonesia to moving into the just energy transition with the current strategy of their energy mix. And Pak Arifin also mentions that the energy transition that we look at is acceleration of new renewable energy, electric vehicle development, and energy efficiency applications. So after the presentations of our two keynote speakers, it is time to move to the opening statement. We have two ambassadors with us. The first one, we would like to ask Her Excellency Marina Berg, the Ambassador of Sweden to Indonesia, to share with us her view on how multilateral cooperation will accelerate green economic recovery in Indonesia. Your Excellency, time is yours.
Thank you. Excellencies, Coordinating Minister for Economic Affairs, Dr. Airlangga Hartarto, Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources, Arifin Tasrif, Minister of Finance, Sri Mulyani Indrawati. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, thank you first of all to the International Institute for Sustainable Development and the National Team for the Acceleration of Poverty Reduction for organizing this timely and important discussion. Thank you also for everyone attending. I'm so glad to take part in this event. We are all living amid climate change. Global warming is increasing and is no longer a distant problem for future generations. It affects all of us living now, whether in Indonesia or in Sweden. But the good thing is that we can actually do something about the climate crisis. And every step we take to reduce our emissions mitigates the negative impact on societies and ecosystems. For this, we need to work together. We need bilateral cooperation, regional, as well as multilateral cooperation. Let me take this opportunity to share some experiences and thoughts from the Swedish perspective. COVID-19 and its global effects is an unprecedented challenge for all of us. And while we now rightly focus on containing the virus, addressing the immediate health crisis and limiting the economic damages, we also need to start tracking our way out of the crisis towards green recovery. We have the chance to rethink development. Broad-based recovery strategies need to be developed to promote growth, employment, and competitiveness. The design of such strategies should include structural elements and be used as an opportunity to undertake important reforms for the future. In doing so, we should endorse the approach of the UN Secretary General. We must ensure that recovery strategies keep us on track towards the 2030 agenda and the goals of the Paris Agreement, building sustainable and inclusive economies. We need to ensure that recovery is based on green transition. And for this, we need more multilateralism and improved global cooperation. When rethinking development, investments should be seen as an opportunity to reboot our economies in a more sustainable way to ensure employment, competitiveness, and export of sustainable, innovative solutions and products. Let me assure you, not least based on Nordic experiences, that a green recovery could help reshape our economies based on our responsibility for the future generations. It could help us create more job opportunities. Greener means richer. It is essential to mitigate the risk of a short-term focus of companies' financial survival, while at the same time holding back long-term sustainable issues. If not doing so, it can evidently lead to a slow transition towards a sustainable society and will most likely increase the financial cost in the long-term perspective. Open and free and multilateral cooperation are key to combating COVID-19 pandemic. By ensuring open, progressive, and sustainable trade, while working together in the WTO, we can mitigate the economic fallout and set the stage for a strong, sustained, and inclusive economic recovery. We should strive for rules that support global growth, underpin our climate and environmental goals, facilitate the participation of developing and least developed countries, benefit women and men, girls and boys equally, and thus contribute to the achievement of the 2030 agenda. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends, green recovery efforts need strong political support and close cooperation between private and public actors. Green recovery could include, but not limited to, avoiding subsidies that would rebuild or increase socioeconomically inefficient and heavily polluting activities or infrastructure investments that lock in greenhouse gas emissions for decades to come. Green recovery could also include and should ensure resilience and low carbon pathways in investments in infrastructure such as transport. Also, finally, support industrial transition towards carbon neutrality, for example, through industry-owned roadmaps, as showcased by Fossil-Free Sweden. A green recovery needs to build on synergies between policies in the areas of climate, environment, energy, infrastructure, employment, trade, development, and agriculture, together with innovative entrepreneurship, sustainable financing, while maximizing the opportunities provided by digitalization. We have a chance that this integrated approach will give us a robust basis for a coherent and result-oriented global response. Let us also remember that green recovery needs to be socially sustainable and include all people. In line with the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda, and not least for economic reasons, women and men must have the same opportunities to be involved in relevant processes. Also, vulnerable groups, communities, and ecosystems must be taken into consideration through a right-based approach. Finally, let me emphasize that this is an endeavor that will require a lot from everyone. The complexity tells us that global cooperation is key, and we need to work together. I'm so happy to say that Indonesia and Sweden do not start from zero in our bilateral cooperation. Since 2017, our two countries have a memorandum of understanding in the field of energy, boosting our common efforts for smart and green energy markets. The Swedish Energy Agency, the Swedish Embassy, and Business Sweden here in Jakarta have continuously been working with Indonesian counterparts in this regard. Sweden will continue to work together with Indonesia, especially in time of pandemic, when international cooperation is more important than ever before. We need to support each other in order to implement necessary reforms. And let's make use of other countries' experiences, share information and knowledge. Jointly, we will continue our ambitious work in meeting national and international energy and climate targets. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Indeed, green recovery needs to be sustainable and inclusive. Therefore, it's very important for us to have integration in many different sectors, and that for sure international cooperation is really now indeed more important than ever before. I reiterate one of your what you mentioned: greener is richer. Thank you, Your Excellency. The second opening statement will be presented by His Excellency Lars Bo Larsen, the Ambassador of Royal Danish to Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and Southeast Asia, on how the policy reforms could make energy transitions as an economic benefit. Your Excellency, time is yours.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to address this important topic. And first of all, let me congratulate the International Institute for Sustainable Development for organizing this important discussion at this very moment, and also to greet the other speakers. I think a very impressive lineup, especially, of course, the Coordinating Minister for Economic Affairs, Erlangga Tanto, and Energy and Mineral Ministers, Arifin Tashrif. And thank you so much for all the insights that you shared with us. I think this is giving a good basis for further dialogue. I emphasized before that I think the timing is very good right now for this discussion. Why? Because on the one hand side, the world is going green on energy. It's a development that's been in the making for a while, but right now we see an acceleration around the world. More countries are coming out with very ambitious climate pledges. Prices for renewables are going down, and we also see that renewables are a real job creator in many, many countries. At the same time, we are of course facing the pandemic, all countries around the world, and I appreciate and agree very much with the points made before, also by the ministers, that post-COVID recovery and the green transition go hand in hand. So right now, the situation around the world is that we see all major actors are taking quite bold steps towards ending also the use of coal and transitioning into green energy, both from the US, from China, from India, and from the European Union side. We have taken the approach from the beginning of the pandemic here to combine the recovery of the pandemic with a green transition in quite impressive and ambitious green deals and injections into our economies. I think looking at Indonesia, I think right now there is a unique opportunity this year to make the same combination of post-COVID recovery, but also to look into the fiscal management of the energy sector, and also at the same time to improve some of the social dimensions of energy that were also mentioned by the speakers before me. The good news is right now we do have plenty international financing ready to be put to use when it comes to the green transition, simply because the business case is there, as we see some of the greener energy forms are being cheaper day by day. But let me stress at the beginning here that political signals are also important. I appreciate very much the ambitions that were put forward also just before by Minister Arifin of the renewable target of 23%. I think it is important to pursue that goal, but I think also that there is a scope to come forward with even more ambitious goals on longer term for 2030 or 2040. And also, I think at some point, we'll also need to be looking into discussions on maybe also stopping investment in new investments in coal. Now, as the subject today is subsidies and also how to combine the green recovery with subsidies, let me just make one remark on that, on one of the hidden subsidies that we see right now, which is the energy price across Indonesia. Right now, today, the tariffs for electricity are lower than the generation cost on average, no matter which kind of source of the generation. And this, of course, in turn, gives a need to also subsidies for the PLN. I know that I think even last week we saw a new capital injection into the PLN for exactly that reason. I think my basic point is, if the PLN is able to obtain tariffs that are closer to the average generation cost, then the need for subsidies for PLN will of course be lower. And it will also at the same time allow for a more optimized procurement strategy that will in turn lower the cost of generation for energy. One, simply when building new power plants, renewables is often cheaper than fossil fuels, so they need to be able to compete at the same level. Secondly, the technology development is so fast that electricity from solar is now in many cases cheaper than, for example, from coal. And if we look further ahead, I think the business case will be even better. And that will also in turn lead to a better economic performance of the PLN. Of course, the subsidy is also there for a reason, for good reason, primarily for a social reason. And I think we also need, especially after COVID, to take this into account very seriously. And if the tariffs will be closer to the average cost of energy, of course, there'll be a need somehow to compensate at least parts of the consumers here. We've seen during COVID quite innovative schemes around Indonesia, how to support households. I think all countries have developed their own systems to do this. One thing that we have noted here is the innovative system of vouchers for IT access. In theory, you can think about the same to give vouchers for energy access for some of the poorer households. Another dimension, when it comes to the social dimension here, would be also the access to energy, the availability, as Minister Arifin said, for energy across also the remote areas. I was happy that you mentioned, Minister Arifin, the quite impressive scheme that you have to substitute diesel generators with small-scale renewable plants. We're happy to support that, and we're also happy that we are engaging in some of the projects that you mentioned across not only the remote areas, but also on Java, when it comes to putting to use innovative state-of-the-art technology, for example, in the waste-to-energy field. But let me also stress that access to, for example, renewable sources in many of the remote areas is, in many cases, the cheapest way to ensure a reliable source of energy, and that will also lead in turn to new growth opportunities, for example, in the fishing areas, applying also to the cold chain and the logistics around, for example, fish and other products. So right now, I think my basic message is Indonesia has a real chance of riding on this global wave of green energy transition. Of course, a prerequisite is working more in exactly the areas that we heard in the beginning from the ministers. And as was stressed, a wide variety of different renewable sources are abundant here in Indonesia. There are many opportunities to pursue. And if the regulations are put right, I think Indonesia could be a real hub for investments over the next coming years that would then in turn also help the Indonesian government to fulfill the ambitions that we just heard from the ministers. So all in all, I'm quite optimistic, and I think this is the reason why I started out by congratulating the Institute for Sustainable Development for this discussion today at this very moment, because I think this is the day where we can really see the combination of the post-COVID recovery, creating jobs, creating growth with exactly the green energy transition that we're seeing around the world. From our side, from Danish side, we're very happy to support the Ministry for Energy and Mineral Resources, as well as the PLN and other entities here. And we look forward to continuing this in all different manners. So for now, I wish you a very good discussion. I think the basis is very good based on what we heard the minister say before. And I look forward to listening into the dialogue today and to continuing also our support here. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. I noted that it's really, if we can look at the options to really looking at the energy transitions and use it as a to really increase the economic benefit, that will be really good to support the Indonesia the Indonesia strategy on green recovery. There is a lot that you mentioned. That is important to look at the coal transitions renewable. It's also good to look at the electric subsidy to economic prices, and then on the green energy, green jobs, and health. Thank you again. And now, since now that we already have our two opening statement, the event is formally open, and I will start the first sessions that will discuss national view from some of the policy leaders on the green recovery. So this is the first session. It looked more on the Indonesia view or Indonesia experience on the green recovery. But before that, for all panelists, because we already have another panelists that are not yet there during our group sessions before, group photo sessions, I would like to request you again to turn on your video. We are going to take another group picture. We have Pak Febrio here that is not with us in this afternoon in the beginning of the session. So is there any everybody already turn on their video, Pak John?
Yes, but we have about 12 panelists opening their video. Let me do a countdown. So,
okay, sure. Thank you.
So, and Pak Luki just open also. Anyone that haven't opened their video, please open your video. So I will take the picture in 3, 2, 1. Let me check the result first. Okay, and I'll take another picture in 3, 2, 1. Looks like we get good pictures, but just to keep it safe, let me take another one. Thank you. 1, 2, 3. That's a nice picture. Thank you. Good.
All good. Okay. Thank you, Pak John. So let's start the first session. The green recovery in Indonesia. The first presentation, it will be from Her Excellency Sri Mulyani Indrawati, PhD, the Minister of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia, that will share the view on how energy subsidy policy reforms can improve fiscal capacity in Indonesia. Since the presentation, since Ibu has other important matters to attend, the presentation will be presented by Mr. Febrio Nathan Kacaribu, SE, MIDEC, PhD, the head of Fiscal Policy Agency of the Minister of Finance. Pak Febrio, time is yours.
Thank you.
Silakan, Pak.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. His Excellencies, Her Excellencies, Bapak Erlangga Hartarto, Coordinating Minister for Economic Affairs, Republic of Indonesia, Bapak Arifin Tasrif, Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources, Republic of Indonesia, Her Excellency Marina Berg, Ambassador of Sweden to Indonesia, His Excellency Lars Bo Larsen, Ambassador for Royal Danish Embassy for Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and Southeast Asia, Bapak Randi Christiansen, Economics and Financial Analyst, IEA, Ibu Eka Melissa, Senior Advisor, Partnership for Governance Reform as Moderator. Thank you very much as well to all participants who can attend this great event. It is a great pleasure indeed for me to participate in this international dialogue. On behalf of the Minister of Finance, please allow me to share our experience regarding Indonesia's fossil fuel subsidy reform, the need for future reform in energy subsidy policies, and somewhat about the energy transition towards clean and sustainable energy. This energy subsidy policy reform is part of our agenda towards more sustainable fiscal and environmental policy. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a mismatch between energy production and energy consumption in Indonesia. Production of oil is low, while demand is still high. Meanwhile, the production of LNG is high, but not met by demand accordingly. To date, Indonesian energy mix is still dominated by fossil-based energies, oil, gas, and coal, while renewable energies share remains modest. Domestic oil production has declined in the last 2 decades. On the other hand, the demand is still increasing. Oil imports needed to fulfill our energy demand, which has made Indonesia become a net oil importer starting from 2003. Overall, oil and gas trade balance recorded a deficit for the first time in 30 years since 2012, which contributed clearly to our deficit overall of Indonesia's trade balance. I would like to share some points on this. First, clearly Indonesia is a net importer of oil and gas, and this is caused by increase in oil and gas consumption while production kept decreasing. This clearly resulted in negative oil and gas trade balance, which contributed to Indonesia's overall negative trade balance, as I mentioned. Second, energy subsidy took a big portion of government budget. If we look at from 2008 until 2014, for example, on average, energy subsidy accounted for around 20% of the central government budget. This is very big. This large energy subsidy spending clearly has limited the fiscal space needed for more productive spending, such as infrastructure, not to mention for human capital investment. Thirdly, this energy subsidy was poorly targeted. Most of the energy subsidy was consumed by the middle and upper income households, not effective at reducing poverty nor inequality. And then the fourth thing, this energy subsidy has become a disincentive for developing renewable energy, since more expensive renewable energy sources become less competitive than its subsidized fossil-based competitor. Indonesia has gone through several reforms, a round of reforms regarding these energy subsidy policies. The most notable one was the reform that we did back in 2015. In this year, government implemented several reforms, such as revoking the gasoline subsidy, implementing fixed subsidy for diesel, and removed 12 customer groups from the subsidized electricity beneficiaries. A significant drop in the world oil price clearly highly contributed to the success of the implementation of this reform back in 2015. Another reform took place in 2017. This is when the government implemented targeted electricity subsidy for the 900 VA household customers. Since then, only households that are listed in the database for poverty reduction, so this is a specific database, we call it DTKS, only households that are listed in this database are eligible for electricity subsidy. The reform in 2015 provided additional fiscal space, clearly, for other productive spendings. The energy subsidy was mainly reallocated to infrastructure spending. That was quite significant increase in 2015. The government continued the mandatory spending, that is 20% of our budget for education. This was since 2009. And we also have this another mandatory spending of 5% for health. This was since 2016. So clearly, efficient budget for subsidy expenditure would be quite beneficial for us to be able to leverage our economic growth, and at the same time alleviating poverty by spending more on health, infrastructure, and also especially social assistance. This reform, nevertheless, contributed to the short-term increase in inflation slightly. Overall inflation was still maintained at a safe level back then. So we were able to mitigate the risk. With several of these reforms have been implemented, there are still plenty of space for the government to reform these current energy subsidy policies that we are having. For example, most of these energy subsidies are still distributed with so-called commodity-based subsidy mechanism. Our study and a lot of studies have shown that commodity-based subsidy is actually creating inclusion error since a lot of non-beneficiaries, non-eligible beneficiaries still have access to the subsidized commodities. On the other hand, social assistance program in which beneficiaries are well targeted clearly will prove to have low inclusion error. So in this light, we would like to transform our subsidy policies further. For example, the LPG and electricity subsidies policies, we would like to transform this better into so-called social assistance mechanism to be more efficient and to be more effective at targeting and lowering poverty rate. Energy subsidy reform is clearly needed to strengthen our overall social assistance program. This consists of PKH, PIP, etc., to achieve lower poverty rate or even eliminate extreme poverty at all. Now, next slide. As shown in these graphs, current energy subsidy is regressive. Non-targeted energy subsidy mechanism creates benefit leakage in which upper income households are still benefited more as compared to lower income households. This leakage is apparent especially on the LPG, diesel, and kerosene. Benefit distribution of these subsidies are determined by the number of consumption, which is in line with the purchasing power. Therefore, the higher the income, the higher the energy subsidy benefit received. There is an exception for example, for the electricity subsidy. We see that this is actually more progressive, which means it is better targeted. Electricity subsidy for households intended for only the 450 VA and also for 900 VA, which is categorized as poor and vulnerable. And clearly, this will have impact in decreasing the inclusion error. However, households in high decile tend to receive more benefits since they tend to have higher electricity consumption. Next, energy subsidy transformation is clearly key for us to an efficient and effective energy subsidy policy. Government and the parliament have reached a mutual agreement to carefully transform our energy subsidy with consideration of time, data accuracy, and infrastructure availability. Targeted beneficiaries, especially the poor and vulnerable households, are available in what we call a Data Terpadu Keluarga Sejahtera, DTKS, which is a unified database. However, there is still challenge in recording the data at the micro level. Small farmer and fishermen, which are still are part of our target for energy subsidy beneficiaries. Next, regarding the LPG subsidy, there are several reasons why we need to reform the current mechanism. First one is clearly there is a wide gap between market price and the administered price, which creates fiscal pressure and market distortion. On the other hand, the price gap has clearly contributed to the growing trend in shifting from non-subsidized LPG to subsidized LPG. Thirdly, our study, especially a study using Susanas, also showed that LPG subsidy benefited higher income households more. For example, for lowest deciles, the poorest 40% received 36.4% of the total subsidy, while on the other hand, the 40% richest received about 39% of the total subsidy. And the last point about this LPG is that most of the LPG subsidy is actually imported, which have made impact to our trade account deficit, especially when LPG's consumption continue to increase. Next slide. Reform agenda in LPG and also kerosene subsidy. We are looking at transforming this from so-called commodity-based into targeted subsidy, or what we call it social assistance program. LPG and kerosene price will be set at its real or actual market price. This is to reduce market distortion and clearly also to avoid smuggling practices. Social assistance will be provided to the right beneficiaries to buy LPG or kerosene needs. Non-cash transaction instruments such as biometric, e-voucher will be prepared to prevent leakage and manipulation. Next slide. Regarding the electricity subsidy, government provides a subsidy to all of the segment of 450 VA household, and only to poor and vulnerable families of 900 VA customers. However, the government has postponed tariff adjustment for the non-subsidized electricity tariffs since 2017 for social and market stability reasons, which clearly this has led to what we call compensation expenses. The electricity subsidy and compensation altogether increased from 53.2 trillion back in 2017 to approximately 79 trillion rupiah in 2020. Clearly, electricity subsidy has been relatively well targeted as poor and vulnerable household group get more benefit. However, compensation benefit mostly the higher income households. So that's another issue. Next slide. Reform agenda in LPG and kerosene subsidies. We are going to continue this, and social assistance is provided for the poor and vulnerable households customers. I think we already mentioned that. We go to the next slide. Indonesia's economic growth, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the most stable among G20 or regional countries in ASEAN or Southeast Asia. Clearly, this is supported by credible fiscal management and structural reforms. In ensuring a sustainable growth ahead and cope with the global challenges, Government of Indonesia, we have a strong commitment facing these issues. We are looking at several risks of trade wars, fluctuations in commodity prices, climate change, and also including we would like to ensure our national energy security and sustainability. As part of the commitment to the environmental sustainability, Indonesia committed to support the carbon dioxide reduction based on Paris Agreement by 29% by 2030 on our own effort, and 41% in 2030 with some international support. Energy is the second largest contributor sector to achieve, when Indonesia trying to achieve our commitment on the emission reduction by 2030. In this picture, we see 314 metric ton of CO2 emission reduction. Developing renewable energy is crucial to achieve this emission reduction target in energy sector, since it contributes as much as 170 metric ton, more than half of the CO2 emission reduction of our commitment. This commitment, ladies and gentlemen, is in line with the target to achieve renewable energy target which is set at 23% by 2025 or 31% in 2050, based on our national energy mix currently. Renewable energy development is crucial not only for reducing further emission, but also for ensuring the sustainability of energy when the fossil fuel energy runs out. However, although renewable energy shares in the energy mix keep increasing, it is still quite far from our target. So we need significant efforts to ensure that we achieve these targets. Next, to promote the development of the renewable energy, government could intervene through fiscal policies that is channeled to revenue, for example, like tax incentives. It could be also through the expenditure, through the ministry spendings, and also through financing, for example, direct lending or guarantee scheme. However, we are all aware that fiscal space is getting still very limited, especially in the next several years. Therefore, government has to create other sources of financing through blended or so-called creative financing, such as issuance of green sukuk, also establishing geothermal fund. There's GREM, there's GUDP, environmental pooling fund, we call it BPDLH, and also there is the establishment of SDGs Indonesia 1 at PT SMI. We also have GCF and other platforms that could support renewable energy development. In terms of tax incentives, there are several that are available at the moment. We see that there are tax holidays for renewable energy generators, tax allowance for renewable energy generators, geothermal energy businesses, and also for bioenergy industries. The exemption of Article 22 income tax on imported goods for renewable energy is also available. Also, there is a VAT exemption, for example, on imported goods for renewable energy. There are also some VAT incentives on imported goods for geothermal activities. We also have import duties exemption on renewable energy. We also have property tax deduction up to 100% on during the exploration stage for geothermal energy. So there are a lot of incentives that are available at the moment. Regarding the blended or creative financing, our government currently has several platforms. Green Sukuk, as I mentioned, is clearly a financing instrument for government programs related to climate change actions, including supporting the Sustainable Development Goals. Blended finance on the so-called that I mentioned before, geothermal projects, PISP, GEUDP, and GREM, which blending the public finance with other financing sources to support the high-risk exploration stage in the geothermal energy projects. So we call it as a de-risking facility. SDG Indonesia 1, I mentioned before, it is a blended finance platform managed by PT SMI to facilitate the involvement of philanthropists, donor, climate funds, green investors, MDBs, international agencies, commercial banks, sovereign wealth funds, institutional investors, etc. Ladies and gentlemen, to summarize, I would like to emphasize key messages from our presentation. We mentioned that previous energy reform is proven to be effective at providing additional fiscal space for more productive spending. This is a very important point for us. There are still some opportunities for our government to implement more reforms on the existing energy policies. The reform is needed to make energy subsidy policy to be more efficient and more effective at targeting the poor and vulnerable households. Reforming energy subsidy policy can provide additional fiscal space needed to support renewable energy development. Energy subsidy savings from the future reform can be reallocated to renewable energy development programs. The additional fiscal space for renewable energy will clearly strengthen our current existing supports for renewable energy and further accelerate its development. This clearly will support the achievement of our renewable energy target and our commitment to provide clean and sustainable energy source, and also have a green recovery overall. Thank you very much for listening and have a good day.
Thank you so much, Pak Febrio. We noted that that Indonesia has actually already done the energy policy reform several times, and there's a lot of lesson learned that we can have from your presentations. The next, we are going to have the second speaker, which is Ms. Randy Christiansen, the economist and financial analyst on clean electricity from the International Energy Agency. Madam, you have 10 minutes to present. Time is yours.
Thank you very much. Technical support, are you putting up my slides?
Oh, sure. I will ask them to, promote you as co-host.
Okay. Minister Haritatu, Minister Tasrif, Minister Indrawati, Pak Febrio, ambassadors, distinguished panelists and participants, thank you very much for letting me speak here today. To IEESD, thank you so much for organizing this important and very timely event. The IEA has a large cooperation with Indonesia, and Indonesia is a priority country for the IEA. So I first want to thank Minister Tasrif and his team for the strong collaboration that we have at the IEA with MEMR on very important issues relating to the power sector. Next slide, please. So I first want to show you a graph showing that if ASEAN as a whole is going to reach the Paris targets, climate targets, then investment in all of the sectors in the power industry has to go up significantly. So it's both in electricity networks and renewable power, and you'll also see there's actually still some investment in fossil fuels. This is not any different for Indonesia, even though the picture is for Southeast Asia as a whole. So there is a clear opportunity for sustainable recovery when it comes to the power sector in Indonesia. Next slide, please. So green recovery and power system enhancement go hand in hand. So for Indonesia, there's a real need for the power sector to be enhanced to achieve a sustainable future. This both relates to technical flexibility, enhancing the capabilities of the current assets to act more flexibly. It also retains to commercial flexibility. In that sense, it is the way that PPAs are structured between PLN and generation, so that in a commercial sense, the technical flexibility can also be utilized. Digitalization is also a main point for Indonesia, because once the power system starts to transform, there's a higher need for optimization, visibility, and predictability of the power system. So investment and financing is a scarce resource, not only for Indonesia, but for the rest of the world. And this means that clear prioritization must take place. One major opportunity for Indonesia to increase investment is to increase investor confidence. If you increase investor confidence, you will enable higher degrees of private investment, for example, in transmission and in distributed energy, such as solar PV. It's important that when the state budget is used for investment in the power sector, that there is an identification of the investments that have the highest return on investment. And this should be across both hardware, software, and institutional investments, because it is not a straightforward business case if you build your way out of the energy transition or you design your way. And I think it's an and, not an or. So these things need to mix. So having a holistic approach to power system development and power system enhancement does go hand in hand with green recovery. Next slide, please. So I want to show you one thing that the IEA did with MEMR, which was an analysis on enabling environments for accelerating investment in renewable energy. So the puzzle really does have many pieces, and remuneration mechanisms are one of those pieces, but their proportion and their scale really does depend on a lot of other factors. So permitting processes, bankable PPAs, social acceptance, grid infrastructure, and long-term RE targets are all part of the puzzle of creating an environment where you're attracting a lot of private investments. So in countries where you don't have these enabling factors, the subsidy needs to be very high to compensate for the risk that investors perceive when investing in the country. But there is a clear opportunity for Indonesia to make policy reforms, especially on the way the PPAs are structured, the way the tendering happens, the pipeline of future investments that will increase this investor confidence and thus lower the need for high compensation. And I think this is key for Indonesia. We're already seeing some really, really good signs out of Indonesia. As Minister Tasrif brilliantly presented, there are a lot of targets. And we expect a presidential decree coming up on renewable energy. But it's really important that these high-level policy targets are followed up by very specific implementation regulation that ensures that the details are ironed out, because for investors and bankable PPAs, the devil really lies in the details. Next slide, please. Another piece of work that the IEA is working with Indonesia on is business models for privately financed transmission, because it doesn't just need to be generation assets that have private investment. Transmission is another option. I do realize and understand that Indonesia has quite strict laws on who can operate the transmission system, but that does not mean that you cannot have private financing go into it. And enabling private finance in different parts of the power system will help bridge the financing gaps that can exist to achieve the government targets. I'm not going to go into details with the different models. I just want to say that looking at innovative and new ways to structure your power sector and attract capital is really important for Indonesia. And we are seeing signs that this is starting to happen, which is very, very positive. Next slide. So power system, what I want to say here is power system enhancement is green recovery, because modernizing Indonesia's power sector has clear economic benefits. So increased reliability and access to renewable energy will bring foreign investment, not just in the power sector, but also, for example, in manufacturing. What we see right now is that manufacturing companies worldwide are increasingly focused on a reliable and green power system, and less so on price. So for Indonesia, doing this transformation and enhancement of the power system removes focus from being a race to the bottom on tariffs to actually showing and showcasing the mass diversity that actually exists in Indonesia for having a reliable and green power system. So in a modernized power system where you have these enabling policies, that attracts competitive financing, and that actually lowers the levelized cost of energy of renewables, which then creates a situation where renewables are cost competitive with thermal investment. So with the additional benefits that renewables bring, the business case becomes more clear. But I do recognize that right now Indonesia is not necessarily there, but with policy reforms that is definitely achievable. And I think the point made by the finance ministry on the level playing field between thermal power plants and renewables through subsidy reform is an important point. But there's also a lot of other points in terms of bankable PPAs, transparent permitting, and transparent tendering schedules that is going to be really important. So the ability of as well to harvest the full potential of digitalization and a modern economy this brings to it very important economic aspects and prosperity, because it will create new jobs, new capacities within Indonesia. So, for example, service contracts, supply chain investments, digital jobs, and so on. So I think the presentation so far, especially from the ministers, show that Indonesia right now is in a place of vast momentum for green recovery and modernizing the power sector, which really can propel the country's economy into a stronger and more sustainable post-pandemic future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nandi. I noted that you keep saying that this is actually the right or the best timing for Indonesia to really do our energy policy reforms, and that we do need the clean, predictable policies and institutions to also help to implement such reform. Okay, so next, with that, we come to the end of the first session. I'm sure you all, a lot of you have a lot of questions, and as we said before, we will not take the questions now. It means we will not read the questions now or having a Q&A sessions at the moment, but you are free to leave the questions on the Q&A box. Because we will look at it and then we will bring it up after the second session. So I just want to remind all the participants, if you have a questions or comments, feel free to put it in the Q&A box at the moment. So we are going to the second session. The second, when in the first sessions we are listening to lesson learned on Indonesia cases. Now we now turn to a more international perspective, and we have a list of 3 international speakers that can help us go through the sessions. The first presenter that we have is Ms. Iveta Geramsinchuk, PhD, who is the lead for sustainable energy supplies from the International Institute for Sustainable Development. Dr. Iveta, you have around 10 minutes to presentations. Time is yours.
Many thanks. Greetings to everyone from IESD. Distinguished fellow panelists, our esteemed partners in the Indonesian government, the ambassadors, thank you for joining this session. Thank you to the participants in the audience. Thank you for all the discussion so far, which we have found extremely rich, and IESD had a privilege to facilitate this event. My presentation will focus more on international experiences, probably as a source of inspiration for Indonesia, and is based on some of the research we are conducting with partners in large emerging economies and also internationally. So globally, there are very significant resources which are now mobilized for recovery, around 15 trillion US dollars. But at the same time, more than 110 countries have pledged to become net zero. And this by 2050. China also has a similar commitment by 2060. And other countries in Asia that have these pledges are the Republic of Korea and Japan. So the question is now how to reconcile climate action with recovery plans, because we know this is a direction where the world is going. We know that between 3 and 5% of the total public money commitments to recovery relate to the key sectors responsible for energy production and consumption, such as power generation, resource extraction, but also mobility, buildings. And we know that still some of these commitments are dominated by fossil fuels. However, over 200 billion US dollars, according to our research, has actually gone to support clean energy. And we can say that from the experience prior to the pandemic and during the last year, the principles of green recovery would generally include counteraction, resistance to the introduction of support measures for fossil fuels. That's the baseline. But then also we can actually raise money for recovery through fossil fuel subsidy reform, especially now is the opportune time because oil prices are low. There is an opportunity to implement fossil fuel and carbon taxation, especially on large fossil fuel producers and consumers. And of course, this has to be done with targeted support to vulnerable groups. So just generally the energy policies that we have, including fiscal policies, have to be more targeted. We also need to spend recovery money wisely. So because renewable energy subsidies per se don't mean that they are going to be efficient. So a lot of detail is in the design. There are a lot of questions in the chat already and in the Q&A box about the high cost of renewable energy in Indonesia. So in Indonesia, probably there is still a need for government support and subsidies for renewable energy to achieve economies of scale. But this is not to be on the permanent basis because, as you have heard from the colleagues from the International Energy Agency, renewable energy is actually cost competitive in a lot of jurisdictions, and I'll later on give examples from India and some other countries. And of course, we need to implement recovery and the clean energy transition policies, providing support to those communities, workers and regions that are fossil fuel dependent. This is about economy diversification. And Indonesia has actually done extremely well in becoming less reliant in its budget on revenues, for instance, from fossil fuel extraction, and diversifying its economy, achieving a very diversified tax base. So from our research, which is consolidated in the energy policy tracker, you can visit the website and play with the data, compare different countries to each other there. We can say that for clean energy policies, the largest investments so far have probably been in clean mobility. So it includes the switch from personal cars and other fossil fuel driven transport to rail, but also from airlines to rail. It includes large packages for electric vehicles and charging infrastructure. This is for the G20 countries and 11 other countries that we have so far looked at. As we discussed previously, oil subsidies, oil product subsidies are particularly linked to the transport sector in countries like Indonesia. Then, of course, there is a lot of support going to multiple sectors at the same time, including resource extraction. And in this respect, the geothermal power has been mentioned for Indonesia, for instance. There may be opportunity there. A lot of measures go to support energy efficiency in buildings and other green retrofits. And power generation is important, but it's actually like the smallest of these 4 areas, so under $20 billion. But I should say that we still see a lot of packages, like Japan passed an $18 billion package for clean energy, which is not specified exactly which sector is going to. So there may be actually more for power generation. And again, in power generation, it's not just renewables, it's also energy efficiency in networks and throughout the value chain. So again, from this data, we can see that fossil fuels are still receiving a lot of support, but in this graph, I excluded all support to fossil fuels and other energy, leaving just clean energy, meaning energy efficiency and renewables. And we can see that in Asian countries in particular, the leaders include China with very large programs for energy efficiency in buildings, but also support to rail and clean mobility. Japan, which I mentioned before, India with very large support for renewable energy in the areas where it needs support, because in India, generally for new builds, renewable energy is the cheapest source of generation. So it's more about things like grids and integration of renewables into the energy system. Many of you may have heard about Green New Deal in the Republic of Korea. And then Australia and New Zealand and Asia and Pacific also have very interesting best practices. So more specifically, I have a couple of examples on this list. So reconciling the needs to improve energy access, for instance, and clean energy transition in India, one of the state governments, the state of Andhra Pradesh, approved such measures: 9 hours of free solar power during the daytime for farmers. In Brazil, another emerging economy, there have been large investments from the National Development Bank for wind power. I already mentioned China with electric vehicles, but they also have large support for rail, and renewable energy generation is generally cost competitive in China, so probably doesn't need so much support. In China, it's more about the support to coal-dependent regions, which are now decreasing coal power generation and production of raw resources as a result. So both developed and emerging economies are investing in rail and public transport. I was very glad to hear about the electric bus program in Indonesia that's following the international trend. And of course, energy efficiency measures, especially in Europe, in buildings, but also in other sectors. With that, I'll just conclude because we have a rich database of different examples, so we will be happy to share more insight with you and to continue these conversations. I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion and the following presentations. Thank you very much and good luck with the session.
Thank you, Dr. Iveta. It's such interesting studies, and I believe that the participants could also see the link and then try to look at it. And the second speaker for this session is presentations by Mr. Nuki Agia Utama, PhD, the Executive Directors for ASEAN Center for Energy, who at this time will be represented by Mr. Septia Buntara Supendi, BSc, MT, the manager of Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Department in ASEAN Center for Energy. Mr. Septia, you also have around 10 minutes for presentations. Time is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, for the nice introduction session. Very good afternoon to all of the excellencies, speakers, and audience who attending the first International Energy, Environmental, and Society Dialogue. First of all, I would like to share an apology message from the ACE Executive Director, Dr. Nuki Agia Utama, for not able to join this interesting dialogue due to prior commitments. My name is Septia Buntara Supendi, the Sustainable Energy, Renewable Energy, and Energy Efficiency Manager of the ASEAN Center for Energy. Allow me to share a presentation to you for this the second session. Next slide, please. Right, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, let's start from a data about world crisis. Based on this historical data from the World Bank, the COVID-19 pandemic crisis shares some similarities with other crises, such as those stemming from natural hazards. We can see there also wars, macroeconomic mismanagement, and international financing meltdowns. However, the current situation, this pandemic crisis, of course, arguably combines the worst features of all of those crises, which include simultaneous supply and demand shock, impact for domestic as well as the global scope. Next slide, please. From our observation during appliance of movement control order, of course, the name is quite different from one country to other country. From the angle of electricity demand, the peak-to-peak load, for example, in Malaysia, Peninsula Malaysia was dropped from around 18 gigawatt to remain at range around 12 until 14 gigawatt only. And this data coming from May 2020, and when the government released the MCO or the movement control order, it being increased again to around 15 gigawatt. It peaks and it increased 16 gigawatt in Q2 2020. Also similarly happened in Thailand, in Philippines, as well as in Indonesia. In short, from our data and observation, the most notable decline was on commercial centers such as business complexes, shopping malls, and hotels, which recorded an increase between 20 to 40% in electricity use. However, because of the new normal situation and also the mechanism, there was a 10 until 30% increase in residential. Of course, it probably means that people like we did currently, we are staying at home as directed by our government or authorities. Next slide, please. Thank you. From the GDP growth rate from our 6 ASEAN Energy Outlook, which prepared by the ASEAN Center for Energy under cooperation with ASEAN German Energy Program, we noticed that GDP is one of the main drivers in shaping the energy systems. The ASEAN GDP growth rate currently actually constant, 2011 PPPs in US dollar has continued steadily around 5% since 2011. In our outlook, the GDP growth is projected to return to pre-COVID rate after 2021, which means that the GDP PPP will be around 2.5 times more than 2020 level by 2040 based on our projection under AO6. Next slide, please. Thank you. Of course, the GDP is the main variable in our projection. Due to the falling GDP, we projected that both for energy demand and supply will be declined on short and long-term period. Next slide, please. So let's have a look on oil and gas sector. Based on our data and information, the industry get affected much compared to other due to its dependency on natural resources and a lot of variables, including geopolitics and other. Next slide, please. Thank you. In Q1, in Q1 2020, the falling electricity demand is quite impact for the COVID-19. For example, as the quarantine practice in some ASEAN member states, which it urged our power utilities to cope with the new situation. Based on the discussion that we have, one of the solutions might be keep the impacted citizens to afford electricity and supporting power utilities to survive the decline revenue based on the COVID-19. Next slide, please. Thank you. Talking about the green recovery, we often correlate it with renewables. In fact, this sector is also inevitably hit by this pandemic. Remarkably, under the disrupted supply chain and logistic, which caused inevitable postponed projects. But again, this sector got benefits since not really affected by the natural resource availability because of the availability of the sun, wind, and others. This pandemic actually creates both opportunities and threat to renewable energy development, as the target and priority of government are still on fence based on the current situation. Next slide, please. Slide, please. Within the oil and gas sector, which experienced the quite big turbulent period, and then while they're getting through the pandemic, and some of the industry player has started to bounce back despite the slow recovery, and then this make remain resilient to survive and sustain their business. Both government and industry played very critical roles in addressing this challenging situation by providing adequate policy measures. And we noted the assistance has been provided by most of the government from our ASEAN member states, such as prioritizing to purchase local fuel, loosening existing energy policy, and selling gas at lower price. Meanwhile, the industry has adopted agile strategy by cutting costs and its capital expenditures. Next slide, please. Similarly to the electricity sector, the falling demand has forced power companies to struggle with the $1 billion of profit drop. However, there is an extreme increase in monthly electricity bills for the residential sectors, which actually happening currently. This might be a very good news, but certainly requires very good support from the government to provide economic assistance in reducing and exempting tariffs, probably of monthly electricity bills to lower tier class customers, which very much affected by the COVID-19. Next slide, please. So despite of the global pandemic, most of the ASEAN member states put renewables as their plan of recovery strategy. This is very in line with the most of the major global investment trend towards greener energy development. So this will be a very good momentum, hopefully, for renewable energy development in the region. Next slide, please. Looking at the current trend of electricity tariff relief in the member states, we hope that the government could extend the period, also expand the stimulus to other affected sector, considering tariff rebates and deferred payments for small business, and introduce payment flexibility. This again, hopefully speed up our recovery process during this pandemic. Next slide, please. Based on the ACE outlook, the energy demand is projected to reach around 1,000 MTOE under baseline scenario by 2040, where fossil fuels, the previous speakers was right, still dominated dominated the baseline scenario, which contributed around half of it. We do hope that we can do intensive energy efficiency measures, which will bring more savings to support the electricity utilization in the region, which later can affect and in line with the tariff relief for the region. Savings from the demand side will directly impact the need of energy being supplied to the region. By the end of the projection year of 2040, ASEAN could reduce the supply from 1,500 MTOE to only 1,100 MTOE under our scenario. This, of course, will not only beneficial for recovery, but also enhance our energy security for the region. Next slide, please. In the long run, the more stringent energy efficiency measures will reduce the needs for conventional power plant capacity, of course, but it could stimulate the renewable energy share in power to grow larger than stated in our current policy or planning. Of course, it also enhance the renewable energy utilization for individual country within the ASEAN region. This, we hope, we also align with strong effort to adopt the high efficiency, low emission or HELE technology for the current coal-based power plant. This hopefully could help us in tackling the existing environmental issue for the current utilization of the coal power plant. In 2017, just to share with you, related on the greenhouse gas emission in ASEAN countries, we identified about 1.7 gigaton CO2 equivalent under our baseline scenarios, and it could be reached double or around 2.2 gigaton CO2 equivalent by 2025, and also increasing time to time the following years. And energy transition pathways could abate these emissions by 28% and 46% in 2040 respectively. And we need the mitigation actions on this and very strong cooperation from all possible elements outside and also within our region. Next slide, please.
Setia, sorry, you only have 1 minute, sorry.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Yeah, because
Okay, thank you for the reminder, moderator. We'll need 2 more slides on this. And yeah, based on the situation, we identify actually on the COVID situation, there is challenge and opportunity. And on top of that, the spirit to apply energy efficient as the way of life is very crucial. Why? Because we hope there will be more savings to enhance the savings later for the renewables utilization or for helping the affected sector for the COVID-19. Next slide, please. We noted there is a lot of impact currently for the number of sectors. We hope there is a short-term tariff relief approach which support the suffered sector or people to wake up or to wake off the pandemic situation and easing the burden on electricity consumers in paying the routine electricity bills. Of course, this will directly beneficial for the local residential or people in country. Next slide, please. So if we design and done right, the COVID-19 recovery package given the government not only can ease the burden of the consumers, but also be the driver for build back better from the current situation towards a greener recovery and enhance the energy security in the region. To achieve that, we would like to recommend such points. First, maybe we need to draw up national programs for housing, industrial, and commercial buildings. Second, provide tax incentives through tax exemption. Third one, offer small to medium-sized loans for households to fund the purchase and installation of solar energy products. The fourth one, we kindly need to reduce fossil fuel subsidies and switch the subsidies to promote renewable energy deployment. And lastly, encourage private participation in joint projects or produce or provide financial assistance. Next slide, please. This concludes my presentation. This presentation is delivered on behalf of the Executive Director of the ASEAN Center for Energy, Dr. Nuki Agia Utama. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Back to you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Septia. Now we have stories from international studies, and then we have stories also from what ASEAN Center of Energy has done in ASEAN. And now we have the third speaker for the sessions, Professor Rafael J. Heffron, the Chair of Global Energy Law and Sustainability at the Center for Energy, Petroleum, and Mineral Law and Policy in the University of Dundee. Professor will present what he thinks is the energy, the just what he thinks as the just transitions in energy policy reform. Professor, you have 10 minutes to present. Time is yours.
Thank you. So it's an honor to speak here today with everyone who has spoken already and on this very important topic. And I'm speaking in session 2, so thinking about, you know, the word strategizing for the green recovery. And what I want to speak to you today is really on the justice element. How can we make sure we strategize for justice and why justice is so important in the green recovery. So who am I? I'm a lawyer from the UK. I have interdisciplinary degrees from Cambridge and Oxford. And I have a range of experience globally around the world. I am a visiting professor at the University of Brawijaya there in Indonesia. So I'm from here at the University of Dundee that you can see at the top in the UK. And this is a centre that has been built around, let's say, initially the UK's reliance on oil and gas, and we have been then operating in terms of the energy transition to move away the UK from oil and gas and to think about low carbon and green economic energy and economic solutions. And we have been producing research in the energy space for 44 years, one of the oldest university affiliated research centres in the world. So I wanted to mention something that is happening quite close to us here in the UK later this year. We have the Paris Agreement, a very influential agreement signed by 195 countries and ratified by 195. So there is huge momentum for action on energy and climate issues. And again, this will be visible later in the climate talks, which will take place in Glasgow here in the UK later this year. And all countries, including Indonesia, will be putting forward their plans for 2030 on energy and climate issues. And just to remember what we are working towards here, you can see on the board at the back of this picture, you know, it's about energy independence, it's about preserving rainforests, sustainability, green jobs, livable cities, renewables, clean water, healthy children, etc. So, you know, this is what we are trying to work for. And, you know, all this is encapsulated in ensuring that the energy sector delivers a fair outcome for society. It helps to deliver justice for the different parts of society. And we can see here this iconic image from the city of New York. And we think if New York was going to be underwater, it would be a big, big issue. This is why energy and climate issues are very, very important for policymakers. And we can see these images here from Jakarta itself. And as we all know, Jakarta is expected to be underwater by 2050. The new capital has already been announced and plans are developing for that new capital. But in terms of the population, the greater population of Jakarta, that's 28 million people, will have to consider relocating to a new city. So, I mean, we see these energy and climate issues, they are on, let's say, everyone's mind. They are coming closer and closer. And that's why we need a green recovery. And we need action to happen very soon and very fast. And we in this context, we think about, the issue of what are we going to leave for the next generation. So, in this image here, what are we going to leave for our children? What is the world we're going to leave for them? So when we talk about a transition, the idea is we want an inclusive transition. And we need to spend some time thinking about who are the stakeholders, the institutions that can help deliver this inclusive and just transition. What are the impacts, from a national and from an international, national and local perspective? What types of transparency, accountability, data analysis do we need? And then about identifying transformations, what can politics do, economics and society, and then how we can achieve that fairness and equality in the policy outcomes. So how can we deliver those just outcomes to our countries? So when we talk about justice, what are we referring to? We are talking about distributive, procedural, restorative, recognition, and cosmopolitan. So these are the forms of justice. This is how we make our policies better, and this is how we ensure that we will have a green recovery where that green recovery is just and delivers societally just outcomes. And just as a reflection, the recent Joe Biden administration, they have appointed someone specifically on this area. They've appointed a professor in law, and she is now the new Deputy Director of Energy Justice at the Department of Energy. So what they are thinking about in the new US administration, again, is how to deliver these just outcomes. And really, this goes back to the message that was said earlier, that when we think of achieving this green recovery, we need to be sending signals to investors. We want investors to come in to Indonesia and many, many other countries. We have to show that there is legal certainty there for the investor to come in. They have to be have the knowledge that they should get a return on their investment. There has to be opportunity provided at a national level in Indonesia. So there has to be realistic investment opportunities presented, for example, in renewable energy. And different incentivization tools have to be offered. There has to be a whole range, as many people have identified different ranges, but to look at one of the examples of a neighboring country in Vietnam through their energy auctions has been well documented, the successful system. But the ambition in Vietnam is to have 100 gigawatts by 2030. And when we consider that Indonesia has 400 gigawatts of low carbon potential, there is great opportunity to encourage new investment in Indonesia. And what we are talking about here when we talk about justice is the more you factor in the issues of justice, and you can see in the center of this globe here, there's identified there are 10 areas of, 12, what we identify as 12 justice risks. And the more you accommodate those into your policy, the more you reduce the risk of the investment. So, you know, the real reason you want just outcomes in society, because they will help lower the costs of borrowing finance for these projects, and ultimately will encourage more and more investment. And that is the idea when we think of a just energy transition, that if we accommodate this justice and we ensure that policy delivers on just outcomes, we can actually make it more attractive to invest in Indonesia, and we can make these projects more attractive to invest in. So I know I only had a very short time today, but anyone who wants to read some of the papers that I've produced with other academics and policymakers on these issues, specifically, we talk about the renewable energies in Indonesia, and that's published in a paper with the Asian Development Bank, freely available. Also thinking about critical mineral development within Indonesia, written with some colleagues at Brawijaya University. And then the final paper discussing the issue of reducing justice risks and therefore creating more attractive investment opportunities from a global perspective. You can read that third paper. So I'll be happy to share those with anyone after. So thank you very much.
Thank you, professors. And with that presentations, we concluded our presentation sessions. And as I promised before, we will bring some of the questions that you place in the Q&A box during presentations. We will bring it up through the slides. Pak John, probably you can help on the slides of the questions. That is the good news, everybody. The bad news is that we only have like 20 minutes for question and answer. So your questions probably may not be able to answer. But if you look at the Q&A box, there are some speakers that already reply to your answers directly. So please look at the answer box on the Q&A box as well. So this is the first questions that we take out. The question is directed actually to Mr. Febrio, but because he has already left for other matters, we will request the help of Pak Rudi. Pak Rudi from TNP 2K to help us on answering this question. Question is in bahasa. Pemerintah semua sadar bahwa subsidi ini tidak tepat sasaran dan terus membebani APBN. Tapi hingga saat ini pemerintah belum punya solusi soal distribusi subsidi energi ini. Kajian dan uji coba padahal sudah dilakukan sejak 2019. Sampai di mana pembahasan soal skema distribusi subsidi yang baru ini, dan kapan target skema subsidi baru akan diberlakukan. Kepada Pak Rudi, kami persilakan. Mungkin bisa dibantu panitia Pak Rudi. Okay, thank you Pak Rudi.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Pak Rudi. Yes, clear, very clear Pak.
Yeah. Please
do so.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Yeah, I am trying to answer the questions. So when we talk about the solutions, I think Pak Febrio has mentioned very clear in his presentations that the solution is there. The solution is basically to shift from what we call as the commodity-based subsidy into targeted subsidy. So the idea is that to move the subsidy, which is for the electricity subsidy and the LPG subsidy, it is now given directly to per kilowatt hour or per kilogram of LPG, which is creating inequality in terms of access and benefit of the subsidy, mostly for the relatively higher income group. So the idea is that we would like to shift the subsidy mechanism, pulling out from the commodity-based subsidies and then giving the price of electricity and the LPG subsidy, LPG price based on economical price or market price, and then giving a certain amount of money, non-cash money, to the poor and vulnerable household, so they can use the non-cash money to buy the electricity or to buy the LPG. So in eventually they will also have subsidized price. But the problem here is that moving from commodity-based subsidy to household-based subsidy or direct subsidy will require a lot of preparations. Yeah, first is that we have to make sure that the database is is clear. Yeah, we already have the DTKS, the household database for the 40% lowest income. Yeah, but we need to make sure that the registrations process for those who are entitled to receive the subsidy happening well. That's one thing. The second thing is that we have to make sure that there is a mechanism, a clear mechanism, because we have to make sure that the amount of money, the non-cash money given to the household is to be used only for paying the electricity or purchasing the LPG. So there is a need of a clear mechanism. There is a need of a technology system to make sure that it is happening. But I'm happy to say that both the database and also the mechanism and also technology are actually available now. Yeah, the TNP2K working together with other ministries, we have been doing some intensive piloting and testing to make sure that the mechanism works. And I'm actually happy to say that the mechanism is works, and I'm in a very high confidence to say that the shifting from the commodity-based subsidy to household-based subsidy can happen. Yeah. When we talk about the timing, when is it going to happen? Yeah. In terms of the preparations, shifting from commodity-based subsidy to household-based subsidy, from my best knowledge, yeah, it will take around 1 year or maybe 1.5 years. Why do we need such a long time to prepare? Because we need to have a proper registration process, and not to mention that we need, a change of some regulations. In the case of LPG subsidy, for example, at least there are 2 presidential regulations needed to be revised. Yeah. The other thing is that we also need to, make sure from the supply point of view, because once the subsidy is given directly to the household, then we have to make sure that the supply for LPG, for example, is available. The other comments that I would like to make is that shifting a subsidy from commodity-based subsidy to household-based subsidy, yeah, will not directly address the problem of inclusivity. Yeah, because at this very moment, those who are eligible to become the beneficiary of electricity subsidy, for example, there are 2, conditions. One, they have to be, belong to poor and vulnerable household. The second, they have to be the customers of PLN. As we know that there is around 5 million households living in Indonesia. Either they don't have access to PLN or they don't, register as the customers of PLN. So how do we make sure that those, are actually, can benefit from the electricity subsidy reform? On the other hand, when we talk about LPG subsidy reform, for example, there are around 12 million households living in Indonesia still, not have access to LPG. So the idea that we are now proposing to the government is that not only the subsidy shifting from the commodity-based subsidy to household-based subsidy, but also to do some adjustment by allowing those who are the poor and vulnerable household who have not access to tail-end electricity grid, or those who have not access to Pertamina's LPG supply, can use their subsidy, can use their non-cash amount of money to buy or to access locally available alternative energy. And if we can do this, this is not only reform the subsidy, the energy subsidy, but also can automatically give benefit for the development of locally available renewable energy, such as biogas, biomass, solar panel, and so on. I think that's some of the solutions. So if you ask that the government hasn't had the solution, I don't think it is correct, because the government has the solution already, and it is very clear. To my knowledge, that the discussions about shifting the subsidy or reforming the subsidy has been there for quite a long time. The parliament is supporting. The high-level government level is also supporting, but the timing will be matters. As you may know, that we are still coping with the pandemic, and the main priority of the government is that for the how to make sure that the impact of the pandemic can be contained, and then having a sustainable recovery. But the preparation should start from now. So if we consider that it will take, for example, 1 or 1.5 years, so I think 2022 or 2023 will be the best year for the implementations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pak Rudi. And now we are taking the second questions. Please up the slides. The second questions is actually for everyone, for every speaker. So I would like to ask all the speakers to respond around 2 to 3 minutes each. I can start with the, it's probably with the Miss Randy Christiansen, because we don't have Pak Febrio here. So we can start with Randy. Please, Randy. So.
Thank you very much. I think there's a lot of international experience that shows that attracting investment in or stimulating RE investment is possible for Indonesia. I think if you look to Vietnam, for example, one of the things you need to be cautious about is the fact that Vietnam provided a very, very beneficial tariff, which then made an influx of renewable investment into the country. But now that that is running out, is kind of stopping. So they have this kind of stop and go development, which is not necessarily desirable, because it will mean you have a lot of renewable energy to integrate at one point and then a lull in the investment. So from international experience, for example, India, what they've been doing is they've been creating these energy corridors, which means that some permitting and connection issues are already focused on especially high resource-rich areas, and evacuating the renewable energy from there into the demand centers. So that's one way. I think when you look at Morocco, for example, one of the things that they did very well to attract or stimulate investment was that they actually created a separate entity that was responsible for tendering, so that the incumbent utility and private investors could compete on equal terms on for renewable energy auctions. If you look to Mexico, for example, they did some auctions that were quite good in the sense that they had a very high amount of predictability in the amount of auctions that were coming out over a period of 3 years, which made investors more willing to establish themselves in the country. So obviously all these countries also have things that you don't want to replicate, but I think all around there's a lot of good experiences that Indonesia can learn from, and it's not a copy-paste solution. Obviously, Indonesia needs to adapt these experiences to their own context. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Randy. And now we move to Iveta. Also answers or giving comment to the same questions. Please do so.
Yes, thank you. I have a very brief remark. If I remember correctly, around 2017, Vietnam actually reformed its electricity tariff to cover the costs of generation. And they differentiated it, so they have a lifeline tariff and some other support for the lowest volume of consumption. So in this respect, I cannot comment right now on the relative prices of electricity to households in Vietnam and Indonesia, but I suspect that in Indonesia still there is a need to reform the tariff to cover the cost of generation so that the costs of thermal generation, but also of renewables becomes covered.
Okay, thank you, Iveta. Now I would like to ask Satya, Pak Satya, if you would also comment or answers on this same question, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. One of the biggest consideration when we want to make comparison between the technology development and also the affordability is we need to see the potential of a country, because different country has different potential and characteristic. There's also, for example, like in Indonesia, Indonesia has very tremendous potential in geothermal, hydro, as well as bioenergy. So it means like when a country could utilize or effectively, how to say, implement the technology related with its potential, I think this is very beneficial for its country. A lot of initiatives coming from our ASEAN member states, for example, in Brunei Darussalam, because they kind of very limited in terms of land, they're trying to develop or to enhance more technology and knowledge on offshore wind in the future, similarly with Vietnam. However, characteristic of one country to another is different. I totally agree we can learn from other best practice coming from different region or countries. However, the best solution or the best situations is only its country who know best about what is need to do in terms of the technology development on renewable energy. Hopefully, this can really how to say shaping the affordability, which beneficial not only for the all community but also especially for the local community in rural area. Thank you.
Thank you, Satya. So now I'll go to Professor Herfrons as the same questions, Professor.
Thank you, and I'll be very quick. I believe that a wider analysis needs to be completed on, the various options that, let's say, renewable energy can provide for Indonesia. I think there's great potential in terms of looking at the electricity markets and seeing, where over, let's say, a 24-hour time period, where that renewable energy can truly impact upon the system. I think definitely there is some discussion on the cost issue in some of the Q&A, and I think we need to look at the costs over the duration of the lifetime of a project, because what we are working towards here is 2030 energy and climate change goals, and they are backed by the science, and we want to keep the world within a 1.5 to 2 degree limit. And we can see that the impact on island nation such as Indonesia, the climate change impacts will be greater. So, you know, there is great potential in renewable energy, and I think it's about really diversifying the energy mix within Indonesia and realizing the justice impacts this can have on people living in the cities and people living in the rural areas, people living in the hard to access areas, and delivering lower and affordable energy. And what I would say is the costs for renewable energy are decreasing. They have decreased significantly already. They are projected to decrease even further. And until we fully cost existing energy sources, we won't realize how cheap renewable energy is. So I think diversifying the energy strategy and achieving more just outcomes is the strategy to go.
Okay, thank you so much, professors. Actually, I just been told that Pak Dadan Kusdian, the Director General of SDM, is still with us. So if Pak Dadan okay with it, would you also respond on these questions? I think he's on mute. So okay. Okay, I think he's on mute. Anyway, so thank you for all speakers for your answers and commentaries. As the time is already over 16:30, very unfortunately, we have to close the Q&A sessions. So just join me in your home to give applause to all the speakers. And I would like to thank everyone for such fruitful discussions. We have learned for 2.5 hours, and I'm very glad that people are staying for this session. Together, we learn and from each other, both national and international view on how the energy policy reforms, in particular, the fossil fuel subsidy reform, could promote ways to equitable access to clean and modern energy in Indonesia. I hope the lesson learned and the strategies that we discussed and covered today will also help us in achieving tremendous impact, and also bring us to a more further discussions on how we look at this energy policy reforms. As to remind you, this is just the beginning of our IEESD series. So we hope that you could also come to the next round and learn together and from each other. On behalf TNP2K, TNP2K, IEESD, and GSI, I would like to say it's been an honor to be among such accomplished speakers, and it was a real pleasure to moderate these discussions and learn so much from speakers and participants. I wish you all a great day. Always take health precautionary, always stay safe, always think green, and thank you. Over to Pak John. Pak John.
Thank you, moderator. And
okay.
For housekeeping reminders, we will send the workshop materials by email to the email address that you submit in the attendance form. So as a reminder, please fill the attendance form by accessing the link. And we have fixed the problem with the phone number. So you can fill in phone numbers in the phone number field. And IEESD will send you all the materials in a few days after the webinar is over. Thank you for your participation.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Terima kasih semua. Acaranya sukses.
Terima kasih, Bapak.
Terima kasih, Pak.
Terima kasih, Pak.